So today we are going to continue with anti-diabetic drugs. We have already discussed the mechanism of insulin secretion and mechanism of its action, major actions on metabolism. Now as well as we have discussed the various preparations of insulin which are available for clinical use based upon their duration of action and based upon the sources. So now continuing with the insulin as a medicine, insulin as a drug, what are the various delivery devices, how it can be administered, because it has to be given by subcutaneous injection. So various devices have been made from time to time to improve the ease and accuracy of administration, so that it is convenient for the patient as well as for the health worker. So new insulin delivery devices, the objective of the development of these devices is to improve the ease and accuracy of administration of insulin, because diabetes is a lifelong condition. Patient may need insulin throughout life. So we have insulin syringes, which are pre-filled disposable syringes for subcutaneous injection. They are convenient to use because patient has to carry only this insulin syringe. There is no need to carry the vials, etc. Every time, everywhere, patient need not carry the vials. Similarly, pen devices are a fountain pen like device. It is basically a syringe only, but it is like a fountain pen, and the cartridge of the pen contains insulin preparations. There is a dial given with which dose of insulin can be settled, and a plunger is pushed to give the drug subcutaneously. So again, in this there is no need to carry the separate vials of insulin because the drug is contained in the cartridge of this pen device. Then there are jet injections or jet injectors. In this device, a high velocity jet of insulin is directed at the site of injection, so that without using the needle, these high velocity particles pierce the skin and reach into the subcutaneous space. So it excludes the need to pierce with the needle. Then there are implants. These are percutaneous reservoirs which are deposited subcutaneously, implanted subcutaneously. These are refillable and are operated by electromechanical mechanisms to regulate the dose of insulin delivered. There are CSII route, continuous subcutaneous insulin infusion. This uses a portable infusion device which is connected to subcutaneous cannula, and it delivers insulin at the basal rate is 1 unit per hour. As well as there are pre-meal bolus dose to control postprandial hyperglycemia. Before the meals, the dose becomes 4 to 15 times the basal dose. Basal dose is 1 unit per hour, and just before the meals, the dose is increased to 4 to 15 times this basal dose, and it is meant for control of postprandial hyperglycemia. So as this is a continuous infusion, we give only regular or fast acting insulin analogs through this CSII. This can be asked as a short note, CSII. Then further development in the form of an external artificial pancreas. Now this is a microprocessor controlled device which is connected through IV lines. So continuously it is measuring the blood glucose levels, calculating the appropriate amount of insulin to be given, and is delivering that amount in a continuous feedback manner. So it is behaving exactly like the pancreas, but it is artificial and lies outside the body. The device lies outside the body. It has access to the blood through IV lines. It continuously measures blood glucose and gives appropriate amount of insulin. For improving the convenience of the patients using this insulins, oral route, rectal route, intraperitoneal and intranasal routes, they are also being studied, and there are efforts being put and research going on to make some delivery devices which can give drug by this route, insulin by these routes. So again, this is an important short note. So, new insulin delivery devices you can get as such, or there can be a short note on CSSI, CSII, or external artificial pancreas. Now, continuing with insulin as a drug, what are the therapeutic uses? Now, insulin, as you know, helps in the uptake and utilization of glucose, so it will control the hyperglycemia in various situations. What are those situations which have hyperglycemia? First and foremost, it is type 1 diabetes mellitus, that is the diabetes mellitus which is dependent on insulin, IDDM, insulin dependent. That means in all cases of IDDM we will have to use insulin. Type 2 diabetes mellitus is normally treated with non-pharmacological measures and oral anti-diabetic drugs, but sometimes in some situations it becomes necessary to give insulin. Those situations when the blood glucose levels cannot be controlled by these measures: diet, exercise and oral drugs. In some patients they develop serious adverse effects with oral drugs, they are not being tolerated, or insulin is added to the oral diabetic drugs to tide over the crisis, such as surgery, trauma, infection, pregnancy, so on. Any type of stress can worsen the diabetic control, so insulin can be added to the oral drugs. Now, how to decide the dose? Insulin is used in a continuous manner throughout life in diabetic patients, and the goal of therapy should be to control the hyperglycemia. We discussed with HbA1c that goal is to keep the HbA1c below 7, because if we aim at reducing it too much to reach the normal range, there are chances of hypoglycemia also. So intensive insulin therapy, it has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. In intensive insulin therapy, the various preparations are used, there are complex regimes, and there are multiple injections, 2 to 4 injections, and aim is round the clock tight glycemic control, that at every time in 24 hours the blood glucose levels should be absolutely within the normal range, tight glycemic control. And for that various preparations, some long acting, some short acting depending upon the meals, and multiple times the blood glucose levels are checked. So this is tight glycemic control. With this sort of intensive therapy, the chances of microvascular complications are reduced, but the risk is of hypoglycemia. So it is better to avoid this in elderly and children. Extremes of ages, we don't want the patient to go into hypoglycemia. So we don't aim for tight glycemic control in elderly and children. So continuing with the therapeutic uses of insulin, it is useful in the diabetic complications like non-ketotic hyperosmolar coma. When the blood glucose levels are very high, we give fast IV infusion with regular insulin, and heparin is also administered in this situation. Another very important condition which can be life-threatening if not managed properly is diabetic ketoacidosis. This condition is precipitated by the stressful conditions. There is dehydration, hyperventilation, acidosis, and impaired consciousness. Dehydration is due to excessive loss of fluid due to excretion of large amounts of glucose and ketone bodies in the urine, and some amount of fluid is lost in hyperventilation also. In this condition, we need to control the dehydration by giving IV fluids, treatment of acidosis along with potassium also, and regular insulin is used to control the blood glucose levels. The dose of regular insulin is, initially we give it as a bolus intravenous injection, and dose is 0.1 to 0.2 units per kg body weight. So for a 70 kg adult, roughly the dose will be 7 to 14. Then we give intravenous infusion of 0.1 to 0.2 units per kg per hour is the rate, and it is continued for few hours till the blood glucose levels reach 300 milligrams per deciliter. This is usually achieved in 4 to 6 hours. Then the infusion rate is reduced, and per hour we give only 2 to 3 units. See here, it is 2 to 3 units per hour, not per kg. So bolus dose followed by infusion of high dose followed by infusion of low dose is the treatment for regular diabetic ketoacidosis. So in addition to regular insulin, we need to give intravenous fluids, because an important feature of diabetic ketoacidosis is dehydration, and we need to correct the dehydration so that blood pressure and heart rate is stabilized and perfusion of the vital organs is maintained. Initially, normal saline is used at a fast rate. It is 1 liter per hour. 1 liter of normal saline is given per hour. Slowly the rate is reduced, and then we give normal saline at 0.5 liters in 4 hours, half liter in 4 hours, and this is continued till the blood pressure and heart rate return to normal. After that, we reduce it to half normal saline at the same rate, that is half liter in 4 hours. Half normal saline is continued till the blood glucose levels are reduced to 300 milligrams per deciliter. Because we are giving at the same time insulin treatment, we have seen the dosages in the previous slide. So they will decrease the blood glucose level. Once the levels are 300 milligrams per liter, 5% glucose is added in half normal saline for maintaining the hepatic glycogen stores and to maintain the blood glucose levels. In addition to IV fluids, for correction of dehydration, and regular insulin for for reducing the blood glucose levels, we need to treat the acidosis, as well as we need to replace the potassium, because as the acidosis improves, the potassium enters intracellularly. So there occurs potassium depletion. Hence, potassium chloride is to be used in the treatment of ketoacidosis. Now, what is the rationale behind the use of potassium chloride in diabetic ketoacidosis? When insulin therapy is started, glucose utilization increases, the fat breakdown stops or reduced, ketone bodies are not being synthesized now, so ketosis subsides. When ketosis or ketoacidosis subsides, the potassium enters inside the cells. Hence, in the blood, there occurs hypokalemia. Levels of potassium suddenly fall in the blood because on treatment of ketosis, the potassium enters inside the cell. So, to replace the potassium in the blood, we give potassium chloride into the intravenous fluids, 10 to 20 milliequivalents per hour. If pH is below 7.1, the acidosis will be treated with sodium bicarbonate 50 milliequivalents added in the IV fluids. In addition to that, sometimes phosphates are needed. Antibiotics are needed to control the infection which might have caused the diabetic ketoacidosis in the first place, and supportive treatment is required. So, in the management of diabetic ketoacidosis, we have seen 5 things: IV fluids, initially normal saline, then half normal saline, then glucose in normal saline. Second thing is regular insulin given by intravenous bolus dose, then intravenous infusion, and then reduced dose. Potassium chloride to check against the hypokalemia which may occur due to movement of potassium from blood into the cells, and sodium bicarbonate for acidosis, and then treatment, supportive and antibiotics, or treatment of the condition which has caused the diabetic ketoacidosis or which has precipitated diabetic ketoacidosis. This question is very frequently asked in your practical prescription as well as in your theory exam, so you need to remember it as such with the dosages and everything. So after the therapeutic uses of insulin in the 4 situations we have discussed: type 1, type 2, non-ketotic hyperosmolar coma, and diabetic ketoacidosis. Next thing is, what are the adverse effects of insulin when we use it for the treatment of or for the control of hyperglycemia. So first and foremost in the adverse effects of insulin is, it has been given to reduce the blood glucose level. It is doing more than required. So hypoglycemia, most frequent and most serious adverse effect. When hypoglycemia occurs, if a meal is missed, patient takes insulin but misses the meal, or meal is delayed. If there is unusual physical activity, or if the dose of insulin is large dose of insulin, unaccustomed physical activity, or missing a meal, they may cause hypoglycemia in a diabetic patient receiving insulin therapy. How will you come to know that patient has gone into hypoglycemia? What are the symptoms? Now, hypoglycemia is a stress on the body, and there occurs autonomic sympathetic stimulation presenting with anxiety, sweating, tremors and palpitation. This is autonomic hyperactivity. It is Such symptoms are more common if hypoglycemia is due to regular insulin because it develops rapidly. Regular insulin is short acting. If its dose is larger or if meal is missed, the hypoglycemia will rapidly occur and the autonomic system will try to compensate for hypoglycemia and there will occur these symptoms, autonomic symptoms of hypoglycemia: sweating, palpitation, tremors, like that. What are other symptoms that can occur in hypoglycemia? There is headache, hunger, dizziness, weakness, fatigue, muscular incoordination. These are due to neuroglycopenia. Neuro is nerves, brain, glyco is energy, glucose, penia is deficiency. There is lack of nutrients going to the brain. Such symptoms are predominant if long-acting insulin preparations are used and are more common in elderly patients. So two types of symptoms occur in hypoglycemia, one which are due to autonomic hyperactivity and others which are due to neuroglycopenia. How will you treat the hypoglycemia? Simple. There is lack of glucose, deficiency of glucose, so replace it, glucose. If patient is conscious, just give him oral glucose. If patient is not conscious, give him intravenously in a dose of 20 to 50 ml. 25 to 50 ml of 50% glucose. See here, concentrated 50% glucose. Normally what we are using is 5%, 10%. Here 50% glucose to a hypoglycemic patient. Now sometimes intravenous line is not accessible. You cannot find the intravenous line. Then and patient is unconscious, you can't give by oral route, intravenous line is not found, then we give glucagon in a dose of 1 milligram by subcutaneous or intramuscular route and patient will become conscious within 15 minutes. Then you can give oral glucose. Very important from clinical point of view, how to judge that a diabetic patient has gone into hypoglycemia, and how to judge from the symptoms, anxiety, tremors, palpitations, and how to manage. Because this treatment can be life-saving, and it is said that if a non-diabetic patient comes in a comatose or unconscious state, and you are unable to differentiate that whether he is in coma due to ketoacidosis or hyperosmolar coma or he is having hypoglycemic coma, then you should first give glucose. If you are not able to differentiate, give glucose, because glucose can save the life of hypoglycemic patient, but it will not kill the hyperglycemic, diabetic, ketoacidosis or hyperosmolar. Whereas insulin can kill this patient. Insulin given to a hypoglycemic will kill him. So rule of thumb is, diabetic patient in coma, best is to do the blood glucose levels by bedside test to judge, or try to judge by the symptoms. If he has anxiety, tremors, dizziness, these things, he is hypoglycemic. If he has Frutti order, hyperventilation, acidotic breathing, then he is diabetic ketoacidosis. But again, it is safer if you are not able to judge from the symptoms, or if you don't have the facility for immediately checking the blood glucose levels, it is best to give the glucose first, because we can take a risk and give glucose, but we can't take risk and give insulin, because this patient will die if insulin is given. So rule of thumb, diabetic patient in coma, try to replace glucose. So this is the first and foremost and maybe sometimes life threatening situation, hypoglycemia. Other adverse effects of insulin are allergic reactions, which are more common with which were frequent with beef or porcine insulin, but are less frequently seen with pure preparations and with human insulins. There can occur lipodystrophy at the site of subcutaneous injection. It is injection. Not much seen with newer preparations and can be managed by changing the injection site. At the beginning of therapy, some patients develop dependent edema, transient dependent edema. It is self-limiting. Now, another thing is insulin resistance, that we are giving insulin but the tissues are not responding to insulin. Insulin resistance is said to have developed if requirement is more than 100 units in a day. If a patient requires more than 100 units per day dose of insulin, we say insulin resistance has developed. It can be acute resistance due to some stress, surgery, inflammation, trauma, or release of hormones that can oppose the action of insulin, like steroids. It can occur in pregnancy, it can occur with the use of oral contraceptives, Cushing syndrome, acromegaly, pheochromocytoma, and in hypertensives. Many stressful situations that can cause hyperglycemia, they will oppose the action of insulin. So, patient needs a higher dose. Chronic insulin resistance is mostly due to the development of high antibody titer against the insulins. We switch over to better preparations, pure preparations. So till now we have discussed the physiology and the pharmacology of insulin. What are various insulin preparations? What are various delivery devices? These two questions are most frequently asked. Then we have discussed the diabetic ketoacidosis and its management. Then we have discussed the adverse drug reactions, out of which first and foremost being the hypoglycemia, and it is important to know the management of hypoglycemia. So then we come on to the classification of oral anti-diabetic drugs. Remember, type 2 diabetes mellitus is always first treated with non-pharmacological measures and oral drugs. These are divided into four basic groups: those which enhance the secretion of insulin. Diabetes is insulin deficiency, so there are drugs which can increase the insulin secretion from the beta cells of pancreas. Remember, oral anti-diabetic drugs have no role in type 1 diabetes. They are used only in type 2 because some of the beta cells are functioning and we can enhance their working by giving the drugs. So drugs can enhance insulin secretion by binding to the sulfonylurea receptors. Those drugs are, first group is sulfonylureas. First generation tolbutamide and chlorpropamide. Second generation drugs are glibenclamide, also known as glyburide, glipizide, gliclazide, and glimepiride. sulfonylureas, 2 generations. They increase the insulin secretion after binding to sulfonylurea receptor. Remember, we discussed this thing with mechanism of insulin secretion, that drugs bind to sulfonylurea receptor and cause closure of the ATP gated potassium channels, which enhances the insulin secretion. Then we have meglitinides, ripaglinide and metiglinide, and then we have diphenylalanine derivative netiglinide. So ripaglinide, metiglinide, netiglinide and sulfonylureas bind to sulfonylurea receptor and increase the insulin secretion from beta cells of pancreas. There are some drugs which can increase insulin secretion by incretin-like action. They mimic the action of incretin, or they prolong the action of incretin. Incretin is a gut hormone which enhances the insulin secretion from the beta cells. So these drugs include this glucagon-like peptide GLP, glucagon-like peptide 1. This is an incretin. Glucagon-like peptide 1 is incretin. It is a gut hormone and it increases the secretion of insulin from beta cells in response to glucose. The agonists of this GLP-1 receptor agonists, they will enhance the insulin release, because these drugs agonists will mimic the effect of GLP, which is one of the incretins. Drugs are exenatide, liraglutide, LB-glutide and dulaglutide. Exenatide, liraglutide, LB-glutide and dulaglutide. Then after exerting their action, the incretins GLP, that is metabolized by dipeptidyl peptidase 4 enzyme. DPP4, dipeptidyl peptidase 4 enzyme, causes metabolism of GLP. So inhibitors of this enzyme will make GLP longer acting. Simple. If incretin is increasing, incretin or GLP you can read as one thing. Gut hormone which increases the secretion of insulin. So either we give the drugs which work like GLP on its receptors, right? Or we give drugs, dipeptidyl peptidase 4 enzyme inhibitors, which inhibit the metabolism of this incretin. So these drugs, DPP4 inhibitors, are sitagliptin, saxagliptin, vildagliptin, alogliptin and linagliptin. So we can we can enhance insulin secretion by either giving drugs which bind to sulfonylurea receptor and close the potassium channels, hence they increase insulin release, or we can give drugs which mimic the action of or prolong the action of incretin, that is a gut hormone which increases release of insulin from the beta cells of pancreas. This is the first group, drugs enhancing insulin secretion. Then continuing with the classification, we have drugs which do not act on beta cells but have primary action on the target organs, liver, skeletal muscles and adipose tissues. They include biguanides. We will discuss their mechanisms in detail. Metformin and fenformin. Metformin is one of the most commonly used drugs in diabetes type 2. Metformin, fenformin are biguanides, and we have thiazolidinediones, that is pioglitazone and rosiglitazone. Then we can decrease the absorption of glucose from gut to control the hyperglycemia, reduce the glucose absorption from GIT. These drugs are alpha glucosidase inhibitors, acarbose, voglibose, and miglitol. Alpha glucosidase inhibitors. Then there are some miscellaneous drugs. Sodium glucose co-transporter 2 inhibitors, canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, and empagliflozin. SGLT, sodium glucose co-transporter 2, that is inhibited. We have amylin mimetic drug, pramlintide, D2 receptor agonist, bromocriptine, you are familiar. There are bile acid sequestrant resins, colsavelum. So these are miscellaneous drugs we will discuss briefly, but you need to know these. Biguanides, very important as a short note. Metformin, its mechanism, uses, ADRs, everything you need to know. Thiazolidinediones, very important as a short note. Frequently used drugs. Alpha glucosidase inhibitors as a short note. Then these are the most important: sulfonylureas, meglitinides, and DPP4 inhibitors. You can get a short note on any drug, and GLP-1 receptor agonists. So that is all about the classification. In the next class on Saturday, we will be discussing the details of oral antidiabetics. Thank you.